Hello, everybody. I'm Ken Haas from Reverend Guitars, coming to you live from sunny, beautiful Louisville, Colorado, home of Wildwood, where they have asked me to tell you about me. I have 10 minutes to go through darn near 50 years. I think we can do it. Here we go. I make guitars. It's awesome. It started with my uncle, Michael Collins, was a guitar player, played in the 60s, played in a U.S. version, touring version of Herman's Hermits, did some gigs with Little Richard, had a player that he played with in Detroit, Rocky Berra, and he had old Telly, an old twin back then, and he was an inspiration to me as a young man. I was born in 1969. He passed away in 1980 when I was 10 years old. And that old Telly hung out under the bed at my grandparents' house. And I used to go over there as an early teenager and slide it out from under the bed and hold it in my lap. And one day my grandfather came in and caught me with the guitar, and I was horrified. And then he said, you know, I've been thinking it's about time you took that home. And then I did, and it was on. I took lessons for a little while, and lessons didn't agree with me. And I don't know if it was the teacher, I don't know what it is, but I wanted to rock. And I didn't want to learn how to play scales, and I sure didn't care about modes. I was a teenager in the 80s, and I liked, you know, the new wave music. I liked the Devos and stuff. And then I discovered the harder stuff and really got into all of the SST bands, your Husker Du's and Black Flags, Minutemen, which led me to the DC stuff, and I was really into Minor Threat, and Dag Nasty is one of my favorite bands. I like all incarnations of Dag Nasty, including the little song I was just playing off of Field Day, and I wanted to be in a band that did that. And so playing guitar and being a band were more important to me than mastering the guitar. I wanted to write songs and be in a band, and I wanted to play in the clubs where those bands played. And me and a couple of my high school buddies formed a band in the late 80s and called the Culture Bandits, and we did that for a number of years. And I went on to start, that bass player and I played together, Jason and I played together for 10, 12 years in various incarnations of bands, which led me to eventually leave Detroit and move down to Toledo to join a band called the Kids from Krypton, which was awesome. And we had a lot of fun doing that band. And we did a few things with a gentleman named Kid Rock. And I had kind of heard of this Reverend Guitar thing. And I was super into it. I really liked the way that they looked. And I saw Bob Ritchie's, and I was like, that's pretty sweet. And then I found one used at one of those music around stores. Out in, I think there used to be one in Novi, Michigan. I don't even think it's there anymore. And I bought one, and it said East Point, Michigan, right on the headstock. And I was like, well, that's right over there. And at the time, I was selling paint and sandpaper for a day job. And I went and knocked on Joe Naylor's door at Reverend, and I said, hey, you guys got to use sandpaper in here. And he said, yeah. And I sold him a bunch of sandpaper, which gave me an excuse to start hanging out at his place every couple of weeks, even though he never was going to buy that much stuff. I just loved going there and seeing where these guitar bodies were being manufactured. And then Joe invited me to a NAMM show, and I walked into this NAMM show and went, oh, I'm doing the wrong thing with my life. This was summer of '99. And I just knew it the second I walked in the door. I was going to be turning 30 that year. I was 29 years old, and I did a sort of life, what do you call it when you sort of, Greg, help me out here. Greg Koch in the house. Yeah. When you take stock taking, they call that. And I realized looking around that NAMM show floor that the guitar was important. And the bands were important, and I liked playing in the bands and stuff, but the thing that really interested me was the guitar itself. And so, and I was just there as a guest. I was just hanging out with Naylor and checking it out for the first time. And I accidentally sold a couple of guitars to Will Ray of the Helicasters. And of course I knew who he was. He was standing in somebody else's booth and I was like, whoa, that's Will Ray. You know, and at the time I didn't know that you just went to the NAMM show and all your heroes were walking around. So he opened the door. He looked at me and he saw my little badge that said Reverend Guitars on it. And he was like, Ken, tell me about Reverend Guitars. And I was like, well, all right. So there's this guy, Joe Naylor, and he designs these guitars that, this and that, blah, 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 blah. And Will's like, oh, that's real interesting. So I go down a couple minutes later, and then there's Will writing Naylor a check. And when Will leaves, of course, he sees me there, and he's like, Joe, that's Ken. That's who I was talking about. He's a real nice guy. And Will goes away, and Joe's like, dude, I'm bringing you to every single one of these from now on. If you can get players like that to come over here and get guitars. And I was like, this is cool. So I used to go to trade shows and guitar shows with Mr. Naylor. And eventually, when we went from the Phenolic series guitars to the Stage King series guitars, I guess we called it back then, but the guitars that we're making now, I signed on to do a NAMM show and knocked it right out of the park. And with the product to sell, these guitars are fantastic. It was all the writing was on the wall, I guess. And so I had a really, really good show, and Joe hired me on as a sales director. And that led me to where we are now. That was in the winter of 2006. And 4 years later, my wife and I bought the company from Joe so that Joe could concentrate on designing guitars. Because Joe, to me, is he is by far the most innovative and creative guitar designer in the business currently, who's just not afraid to do new things, and freeing him up from the day-to-day of payroll and all that crap. Joe was able to jump right in and do some of the best work of his career. And so now here we are, 9 years after this transition. Whoa! And I am the CEO of Reverend Guitars and Railhammer Pickups. Joe is come off the heels of designing that Air Sonic guitar we have, and the guitar for Greg, of course. We have a bunch of really cool things coming up. While all that's been going on, I still play in bands. I sing and play lead guitar in the Polka Floyd show, which is the world's only Pink Floyd tribute polka band. It's hilarious. Look for us out on the road at a Oktoberfest near you. And then I am honored to play in a band called Jay Navarro and the Traders with Jay Navarro from the Suicide Machines. We do like a ska reggae, punk rock kind of a thing, and we travel all over the world, playing it all over the country. We went to Japan last year. It was amazing. I also play steel guitar in a band called the Zimmerman Twins. And we travel down to Nashville around the NAMM shows usually, although the last couple of years we haven't done it, but some of you guys may have seen us down there. If you're Nashvillians, it's a good time. I like to keep myself in gigs. I like to keep myself in gigs that sort of push my limits. The ska thing that I do with the Traders is cool, and it's a rhythmic thing that I'm not used to doing, so I'm learning all the time. I'm always learning with the steel guitar. I play an old 1958 double 8-string Fender String Master in the Zimmerman Twins, and he writes great songs, and I'm constantly teaching myself how to play that instrument. And I feel like keeping a close relationship with the music and the bands and being on the road helps me to solidify this relationship of what you guys are looking at when you look at a guitar company. I never wanted to be some sort of chairman of a board or some sort of go-between banker person, financial guy, whatever.
Rock savage.
No, I'm as Greg would say, rock savage. I'm out there on stages with, kicking ass because I love it. And then I get to take that energy and turn it towards doing this and work with fantastic artists. And in closing, I have a good time wherever I go.